Well, this morning's passage is an interesting one, and there are a number of odd stories about my own family that came to mind as I was thinking about this story of Jesus as a teenager. We've moved very rapidly from the stories of Jesus' birth, that nativity scene that we kind of love, we see on Christmas cards everywhere, into this story of family. Mary, Joseph, Jesus, a young adolescent. Maybe it's easier for us to relate to Jesus as a tiny baby. I mean, who doesn't love babies, right? We love them because they're cute and cuddly. But there's something about babies that make them easy to project whatever we like onto a child. You know, a tiny baby, we can think all the wonderful thoughts about them that we like. And we can pick them up and cuddle them and squeeze them and love them and think that they're perfect. It's a bit harder with a teenager. It's a bit harder with a 12-year-old. I won't mention 16-year-olds and 14-year-olds. They're just a whole other ballgame. But a baby is like a blank tablet. You can sort of almost imagine them to be whatever you want them to be. And in some ways, you do whatever you want to do with them. And we love that about babies because they can't talk back, you know. They can't say, no, I'm not like that. I don't want to be squeezed and cuddled right at this moment. Thank you very much. Whereas a teenager is a completely different thing. And this morning we realise that Jesus is a teenager who talks back. Not just to the temple authorities, he talks back to his parents, but also to us. Jesus speaks to us. And I hope that you can come to appreciate the adolescent Jesus just as much as you might appreciate the baby Jesus. This is it's the only passage that gives us a story of Jesus' childhood, as opposed to the baby and then stories of him as an adult. It's the only one we have in that in-between period. Jesus, who is God's Son, the one God dearly loves, is presented to us as a 12-year-old, a learner, a student who's able to grow in wisdom and in favour with God and with people. It might be easier to receive God come to us as a baby. Certainly easier than an adolescent, possibly even a smart aleck. Someone who doesn't just question, but poses questions and answers questions. So I'm sorry if you like your God to be high and lifted up, perfect and far removed from human life. This God comes down to us and is fully human. That's partly what this story is about, reminding us of Jesus' humanity. In many ways, it's a really ordinary story. As I said, I've just found out this week that my brother-in-law stole off to a far-flung city when he was 12 years old. It's a story that we probably have our own versions of in different ways right across all of our families. But that Jesus grew and developed as a human being is not only a sign to us of his humanity, but it's also a pattern for us to follow. If Jesus grew in wisdom, in his learning, he grew in his closeness to God, then perhaps so should we. I think it's probably quite sad that there are some Christians who have that notion in their mind that they don't need to grow anymore, that they've arrived. There's no need for growth and further learning. Jesus, full humanity, talking back to his distraught parents, as a typical teenager wouldn't, he doesn't think to tell them that he was planning on staying in the temple when everybody else has moved. Doesn't think to pass on that little bit of information about what he was going to do. And then when the frantic parents finally find him a day later, he responds with, "Well, didn't you know it was necessary for me to be in my Father's house?" To me, it sounds like the kind of things teenagers presume. But it's amazing, isn't it, that Luke, who is so intent on presenting Jesus to us as the long-expected Messiah, God's Son, the Saviour of the world, should record this event. He's the only one to record this event. And it's thoroughly human. A precocious preteen in a pretty normal family kind of scenario full of their ordinary tensions and struggles. Luke's account has two further points that I want to highlight. Jesus goes home and, we're told, is obedient to his parents, which is interesting. It's interesting that Jesus' divinity, we know that we're going to hear a lot about his divinity in the rest of the story, but that doesn't mean he's, there's no need for him to be obedient to his earthly parents. This is one of those times when we're told he was obedient, like ordinary teenagers would be expected to be. That he's not so high and mighty that he knows better. And that's a good point. The other is that Mary, though she's confused about what this whole little story, what this scenario might have meant, what Jesus' words might have meant, we're told she treasures them in her heart. Mary is perceptive enough to know that Jesus is more than just her child, that he is marked for a unique vocation. His own mother must grow in her understanding of who Jesus is. Jesus here is completely human. As I said last week, it's almost direct competition to Jesus, who might have been global and universal and far removed. But rather we see him as a boy, anchored firmly into a very specific family and into the fulfilment of God's promises to the people of Israel. He's studying their scriptures and he's growing in their teaching and in his wisdom. So at the same time, Jesus is fully human and he's utterly divine. He's so divine that we don't at first understand him. So we must take time for us to grow in our comprehension, for us to grow in wisdom and grow in our closeness to God. There's no saying Jesus Christ is God and in all God's glory and majesty, that he was pretending to be human alongside us for a while. There are different times in the church's history where people have argued that was the case. And I remember in my very early days when I was a teenager, somebody asked me to describe Jesus. And I likened Jesus to Mowgli, the boy who grows up believing he's a wolf in a wolf pack. You know, it's a great little story. And I thought, well, Jesus was a bit like that. He grew up as a human, but really he was God. The problem with that is that it's heresy. I mean, it's only a mild thing, but it's one of those things that you can easily get caught into thinking that Jesus was pretending to be human, that he was God all along. But that's not the case. The church, for all of its history, has argued, no, Jesus was fully human. And this is one of those lovely stories that says Jesus was fully, normally, ordinarily human. At the same time, he's divine. Now that, in a nutshell, is the mystery of incarnation. God being born in our midst, but not pretending to be human, actually human. So let us, in our time of worship, let us, in our coming to church, listening to the Bible readings, listening even to dodgy sermons, let us watch as Jesus grows in his stature and as he eventually leaves the security of his family. He grows beyond his native Galilee and heads towards Jerusalem. As he grows beyond the bounds of his own people and begins to connect with the Gentiles. As he grows closer to us in order to be with us, in order to reconcile us with God. Growing beyond all of those boundaries was necessary. So I hope that you don't come to church in order simply to be confirmed in what you already know about Jesus. But may you come here in order to grow in wisdom, to grow in your experience of the person Jesus, and marvel at what you hear from him and ponder them in your heart, that you might grow closer to God, who comes close to you. Amen.